And that's why it's called an octave mandolin. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Coverbandconfidential podcast, the podcast for cover band musicians and band leaders who want to learn to rock more and suck less. Coming to you from Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray, and special guest this week, given our boy Adam is across the pond. Please introduce yourself.
From Austin, Texas, my name is Ben Hulan, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And you've been a member of the Patreon for, Adam has the spreadsheet. I don't actually know how long, but it seems like a long time to me. How long has it been?
Yeah, I think it's been since February,
Okay.
So nearly a year.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Very good. And Ben's been a big active part of it, always chiming in on stuff, good, contributions and thoughts and whatever. Really great to have you. This episode, as some of you will recall who heard it, I put out word that I was going to be solo on it because Adam will be in England, and asked what is a topic that we haven't covered or haven't covered enough, or that you have a particular insight on, and what's your pitch for why you're the right person to have that conversation with me. We got some really good submissions, folks, some really good ones. And I picked, I think, a great one, but we will likely have some guests on in the next few months because they were just some really good topics that came in. So
yeah, absolutely. And just to backtrack one bit, I just want to say, as someone who is an active member of the Patreon group, it's a really, really cool community of people. It's a great place where you can just log in at any time, night or day, drop in a question or answer somebody's question, read up on different gear that people are exploring, and it's active. People are actively engaged in it, and it's really nice to be a part of. So I'm psyched to be a part of it. And I agree, having read some of the otch suggestions that were dropped in the Patreon, there's some really meaty topics that y'all could dig into
for sure
anytime.
For sure.
So I'm happy that you chose mine.
Yep. A bunch of them came by email too, and submissions on the website. We had quite a few, so we're well set for content, which is a good thing.
Yeah. And I just want to say, when I started listening to this podcast, it was the very beginning of the pandemic. And for me, it was really a lifeline to a community that I felt for a little while that I had been at risk of losing.
Yeah.
But I realized there were so many other people in my situation who didn't have any gigs anymore. And suddenly, if you got together with other people, you had to social distance. And at the beginning, you didn't even know what that was yet. And so it was really cool to find this podcast and to even pick up on a lot of the back episodes and hear your stories and the struggles that you had and the adventures in gigging, as well as moments of genuine vulnerability, sharing things from your personal lives, and just being real with the public community has been really incredible. So I just wanted to give you and Adam a big shout out and a thank you for that, because it's been a great resource for me, inspiring and enjoyable, funny and heartfelt. So I'm glad to be making a very small contribution tonight.
Yeah.
I'll be listening for a long time to come, I'm sure.
Excellent. Thanks for that. I had a whole review I was going to do, but I think that may have just said it. We'll save this review for next week. Yeah, it was a rough time to put out a weekly podcast. We had no news, nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
So we were just, all there was hanging in together, and distraction casts and various other things.
We were all right there with you. You know, I had been in a band. I was in a band at that time that was called All She Wrote. And my lead singer, who was really the band organizer, a guy named Caleb Williams, great musician, great songwriter. We did do some cover songs, but a lot of original music as well. His girlfriend had a baby, and he ended up getting married and then moving to Arizona. So even if the pandemic ended, I wasn't going to have any gigs in that band anymore anyway. But they're doing great out there now. And it's just been really interesting to have this as a resource and to be able to get real about the thing that we all love and do when we're not doing our day jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of your background, why don't you run us through what you play and do and the groups you're in and how long you've been around? Give us a little of your, resume and background.
Sure. Thank you. So, I grew up in a musical family. When I was a little kid, we didn't even really have a TV for most of my childhood. And I just thought everybody sat around and played music after dinner. And it wasn't until I was a certain age that I realized that was an unusual upbringing. I was always singing, and I picked up the guitar at age 16. I had picked up the trumpet when I was 8. So I was learning to read music and learning to play lots of stuff, and active in church and active in school. And when I got to college, I got really interested in bluegrass music. I went to college in Virginia. I went to William and Mary. And after graduating, I got a job as an actor musician at a place not too far from where you are, actually, that hires a lot of people from UNC Greensboro.
Hmm.
That's called the Theater at Limekiln in Lexington, Virginia.
Okay.
And so my job was to write and perform. We had a radio show at that time, as well as a grant to make children's, or really, they were children's shows based on Appalachian folk tales with traditional influenced music. And we would tour around to schools and give these workshops. And so I had a really kind of a whimsical start to my musical career with a lot of theater and a lot of different kinds of music and playing guitar and mandolin. I was playing upright bass as well at that time. Um, and then after 3 years, I left that artist in residency program and I started teaching in high school. And I was still pursuing a band with bluegrass and doing originals. And when I had my first son, I sort of realized I needed to make a career change. I needed to make more money, and I wanted to have more energy for my kid than spending it at a school giving all my energy to other people's kids.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't enjoy teaching, but it was just what I needed to do. It was right
Sure.
for me.
Sure.
And so, of course, I still needed music in the background. So I joined a cover band. It was a tribute band, a Beach Boys tribute band based out of Maryland called Still Surfin'. It's a
Cool.
Beach Boys cover band,
That's great.
Beach Boys tribute band. And it was a great time. I was in that band for about a year. And the Matthew Gross was the name of the leader, and he owned all of the equipment. He owned all of our guitars. He owned our costumes. He owned the drum kit. He owned
Wow.
everything. And we would just go and play shows on a stage set up at a beach somewhere. We would play at the Army Navy Country Club. We had all these really cool gigs. And I was comparing that to all of the original music that I had done in my head, playing for $75
Right.
at, some
Split
coffee
5
house.
ways, right?
Split 5 ways.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, there's something to this cover band stuff. And so ever since then, I've been in bands that are a mix of originals and covers. And the most successful project that I was in was a band in California called the Courtney Janes. So I moved to California in 2006, and I lived there for about 10 years. And I was in a band the whole time. And we started off doing covers, or excuse me, we started off doing originals, and we recorded some CDs, but we realized there was a lot more money doing these covers, and we started becoming a Napa Valley wedding band, right? Now, there have been one of the reasons I wanted to pitch this concept, which I don't think we've even
We
said
have
what
not.
the-
We have
what
not.
the
We're
main
teasing. We're still
meat and
teasing. Still
potatoes is here.
teasing. Yeah.
I feel like that I love the podcast. I hope that's obvious. But there's been a bias, I think, and the bias has been towards using the technology that exists to create and curate bands with these set lists, doctorized lists of material that accurately represent the songs the way that they were originally recorded. Right. You can use tracks, and you can literally have a note for note rendition of the keyboard without a keyboardist on your stage.
Yep.
Or you can use it as a practice tool if your keyboardist can't come to rehearsal that night. And you use click tracks, you use in-ear monitors, and you can make everything to the beat exactly the way that the original recording was, with only a few differences. Maybe your guitar tone isn't exactly right. Maybe your voice doesn't exactly match the fingerprint of the famous person who recorded it in the first place, but the audience feels it. And the more that's in common between your performance and the original, the more that they have that sensation of that their memories coming back to life and enjoying the cover band experience in a way that we all love. But when I was first learning covers, a lot of this technology didn't exist. And I found that the process, at least in my experience, the process of doing cover bands was a lot more organic. We didn't have ultimate guitar tabs teaching us note for note transcriptions of that solo or whatever lick that we wanted. So we would kind of approximate things. We would use our ears and try to get as close as possible. And sometimes if we couldn't do it, we would say, what's better than not playing this right is just not even trying to play it right and doing it totally differently.
Right.
So the concept that I pitched for our conversation tonight was the idea of, let's take one episode to say we're going to assume that we're not trying to represent this music true to its original production. And the question is, how do you make it? How do you still sell it?
Yeah.
How do you make it your own? And how do you make a viable product that people are still going to be excited about engaging with? Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think there are two ways you might land on wanting that outcome. One of which you just kind of touched on, which is by necessity.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have a keyboard player. How am I going to cover all those 80s tunes in my new 80s project without a keyboard player? Well, I've chosen not to. I'm doing tracks for that one. But for a lot of things that I've done, the need to capture and recreate the spirit of a song enough that it triggers the nostalgia response that I'm after, at least, without the lineup that originally recorded it, prompts some creativity, right? You gotta get creative and
Yeah.
think about those things. That's one way you might land on this make it your own kind of concept. The other is as a real artistic choice. And I don't mean to say it's either or, it could be both at the same time. You take a band like, Pork Tornadoes, famous for this, right? They take
Right.
pop tunes and they rock them up in ways that are interesting and creative, and their decision making about how they have customized, personalized those to their own ethos is part of the joy of what they do. So I think it can be both of those things, although in my experience, certainly necessity is the mother of reinvention of a song. Some part is too technical for me on guitar. I'm not a super technical guitarist. So what am I going to do
Mhm.
there? Well, I'm going to do something that captures the feeling, the spirit, but is in my own vernacular, my guitar
Yeah.
voice. Now, you have made some choices. We haven't yet talked about the current project you're in, but the current projects you're in involve instrumentation that
Yeah.
really requires some thinking about how you're going to
Right.
adapt songs. So talk us through that.
Sure. Thanks. So I'm in a drum and brass band called La Murga de Austin. And La Murga, uh, we play at the soccer stadium in Q2 Stadium in Austin, Texas for all the home games. And as a staple of the soccer community here, we also get invited to do a lot of other really cool gigs all around town because for some reason people love us. And it was one of the questions that I had, like, what are we doing? Are we even really a cover band? And I think that's a question that it's okay to answer. If you listen to us and say, no, you're not a cover band, I'm fine with that. But I want to just, for this conversation, I want to take the assumption that yes, we're a cover band. And then what does that mean?
But
So,
before we do though, tell me about, so drum and brass. Are we
yes.
talking like a marching band kind of concept, or what are the pieces involved in a drum and brass band?
Yeah. Okay. Well, a drum and brass band can be a lot of different things. Our drum and brass band is really based on soccer culture and the bands that you'll hear in soccer stadiums, football stadiums, we call them
Yeah,
down there,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
In Mexico and Central America and in other parts of the world. So the instrumentation involves trumpet, trombone, sousaphone. Um, we have various drums. We have a snare, but we also have some Latin drums, a repique and a surdo and a bombo, which is like a bass drum with a cymbal on top, a hi-hat on top
Hmm.
that you can play with your hand. So we have very specific instrumentation and some of the beats that the drum line plays also there may be like a cumbia beat for a lot of our
Hmm.
music, and maybe the song that we're doing is not a cumbia at all, but we just impose that upon it for our own arrangement.
And
Or
there's a
there are
big
other,
tradition of that in Latin music too. I mean, the claves are used
yes,
to Latinize a lot of things that aren't necessarily written for that originally.
right. So some of the songs that we do, just to give you an idea, um, there is a TV show that was on Netflix, I think, Spanish language show called Club de Cuervos, Club of Crows, which eventually got translated into English and reimagined as Ted Lasso. So
Huh.
Ted Lasso originally was based on this other Spanish language show called Club de Cuervos. And we play the theme song from Club de Cuervos as one of our songs. And the lyrics we sing are just, oh, 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 because it's a soccer chant. And that kind of gives you and then the most famous one that all of these bands do is that ole, ole, ole,
Mm.
so we do a lot of those ole, ole, ola kind of songs that you would hear in any soccer stadium around the world. Um, And then it gets a little more Austin-y, right? So we play one that goes da 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 da, which is "Pop Goes the World"
Right.
by Men Without Hats.
Yeah.
But the lyrics we say are "Oh, vamos ATX, 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 vamos ATX." It's a cheer for the soccer team, right? We play "Pepas" by Farruko. We play "It's a Heartache" by Bonnie Taylor. We play "Can't Take My Eyes Off of You" by Frankie Valli.
Wow.
We play a song called "Nunca es Suficiente para Ti," which is by a woman named Natalia Lafourcade, who's incredible. We play "Industry Baby" by Lil Nas X. We play "Pink Pony Club" by Chappell Roan. So these are covers, but we're not singing the original lyrics in most cases,
Yeah.
right? Um, and uh, and also they're chants. So we have an A part and a B part, and it's on infinite loop. And the idea is to keep a stadium of up to 18,000 people engaged and chanting along with us to inspire our team members to go. And then we have gigs outside of that. We might play a fundraiser, or we might play a podcast that's doing a live session at, ACL Live or something like that. And they're always soccer related or something like, so that there's a tie-in. But we've become a staple for Austin for doing a certain niche
Yeah.
kinds of events with this kind of energy that we bring. And it's a combination between cover band music and street theater.
Mm.
Because in addition to these musicians, we also have flags, we have smoke bombs, pyrotechnics, and we have people called capos who are chanting the lyrics on megaphones, right? And so it's almost like cheerleading, but not quite. It's its own thing. It's
Yeah.
really, really fun.
And how many people are
yeah.
in the band?
At one point we had over 100 members.
Okay.
But engagement, it's mostly well, we're volunteers.
Uh-huh.
The band is a nonprofit, and we do a lot of paid gigs, but we don't get paid individually. The money goes into the pool that we then use for our parties and for repairing instruments and a lot of other expenses that we have for buying our pyrotechnics, for materials for flags and our banners and things that we bring every week. We do a lot of parades. So it costs a lot of money to run the thing, and we're excited to be able to do everything that we can do.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not your average cover band business model.
Yeah, clearly. And so I'm curious about what the process is to decide to do "Pop Goes the World" as one of your pieces. How did that happen?
Yeah, I joined about 8 or 9 months after this thing originally got formed. Uh-huh. But it was still before our first season of soccer, and we're going into our 5th season now, so it's been a minute. And I have been deeply involved in the music selection, and really the arrangement of the songs is one of the biggest contributions that I make, just because it's easy for me to read and write music and use music editing software. It's just a skill that I have. So that's useful, but it's not, it doesn't really give me any creative authority over anyone else. It's really very much by committee. We have a Slack channel. We're constantly talking about songs that we think can be bangers. And it's a matter of somebody coming up with a lyrical hook that is repetitive but memorable, and somebody else selecting the part from the song that best represents the energy that we want to communicate right during that thing. So a song may be 4 minutes long. We may be only taking 20 seconds here and 30 seconds here and mashing them together and playing them on loop until it just evolves into the next song and the next song and the next song. So, and you can hear us, by the way, on Apple TV anytime Austin FC is playing a home game. So
cool.
We're very loud.
It sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But very much not I mean, you're not going to do verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, right? That's not the gig. Your inciting chant is what's happening, and so it needs to be built around what the crowd's going to do in response to it. And
yeah, it's got to be simple enough that 18,000, up to 18,000 people who are probably drinking, can chant them. And some of them are in English, and some of them are in Spanish, and some of them are mixed. So it's a cultural phenomenon, and it's really kind of neat.
Sounds like a ton of fun.
Yeah, it is.
All right, so that's one whole project you're doing, and I didn't.
That's one.
Did you say what you play in it? What's your instrument?
Yeah, I play the trumpet in that, and I started playing trumpet when I was 8, so I've played for many years.
I played trumpet all through middle and high school, and I haven't touched one since. But I've been thinking about playing a trumpet through my harmonizer and making myself a horn section. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that would even work,
Yeah.
but
It would.
yeah,
Yes.
I think it's a fun idea.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so that's one whole project. Tell us about, so the next whole project has to do with an instrument that I was unaware existed before you talked about it, and I still don't really understand.
Okay. So an octave mandolin is just a mandolin that is tuned one octave below.
Okay.
And the thinking is, so you've heard mandolin, you've probably thought about grabbing one for certain parts. If you want to play, I don't know, Losing My Religion, or if you
Exactly.
want to play
That's the one I've used one in.
you know, yeah, and it's a hook, and people see me playing mandolin and they're like, "Hey man, can you play this song?" It's sort of like the stairway to heaven of mandolin
Sure,
players, right?
sure.
Um, if you want to play the Hooters song, And We Danced, right? That's
Yeah,
got a great mandolin part in
yeah, a
it.
lot
Or,
of Rod Stewart.
there's da 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 da, yeah,
Yeah,
and some Led Zeppelin. So
yeah,
those are all mandolin tunes. Um, but if you think about like having somebody sit down with a mandolin solo and singing you a song while playing the mandolin, I love the mandolin, but that can be a little jarring.
yeah.
It's a lead instrument that blends with the whole band. So having something that's tuned exactly like a mandolin, an octave below it, is nice because you can play a lot of this mandolin material and you don't need a whole band because you've got a lower voice that sits beneath your singing voice and can support it harmonically. So it's a really neat thing, and they're becoming more and more popular. And what I'm seeing, you probably use reverb. Most of us who are musicians will use reverb or just keep an eye on things all the
Sure.
time.
Yep.
I've seen the number of octave mandolins that are available at any one time start from zero. One will
Mm-hmm.
randomly pop up every couple of weeks, and now they're there all the time.
Hmm.
More people are making them, people are buying them, but then they don't know what to do with it. And so maybe they want to resell it, right? Because it's an instrument that doesn't really have a strong foothold in our culture musically,
And do you do
unless you
you
play Irish music.
do you mostly pluck it? Do you strum it? Like, what's the approach to the instrument?
Yeah, it's very much it. Oh, so okay, what we're talking about right now is a Patreon channel that I started that's called Exploring Octave Mandolin.
Yeah.
And the fundamental premise behind Exploring Octave Mandolin is I wanted to ask the question, if we take any given cover band song or any classic rock song or whatever, can we play the guitar part on the octave mandolin in a way that will carry the song,
Mm.
right? Because I have this, in part, an idea about using an octave mandolin as the main instrument in a cover band to give it something unique that people might be able to talk about, right? Because I'm a mandolin player and I know the fingering positions and the melodies for a ton of music,
Right.
transposing it an octave down, it's a bigger scale length, so you have to learn
Sure.
those stretches. But a lot of music will translate over to it really easily. So learning the basic chords, and the strumming is exactly like a guitar, except you've only got four sets of strings instead of six individual strings.
Right.
And then, once you learn the scales and the chord shapes, learning how to find these different, jazzy parts that people might play. Some of the music that I've transcribed already includes a Brown Eyed Girl
Mm.
that works really nicely on a mandolin. Um, Guns N' Roses, Sweet Child of Mine. It's always a really fun hook to play on a mandolin. So I have a transcription for that for octave. I've got some Doobie Brothers in there. I've got America, Ventura Highway, things like that that are sort of plucky but strummy at the same.
Boy, yeah, no, I was just thinking that. I bet that sounds great.
You know what I mean?
That riff.
Anything that
Yeah.
sounds good on a 12 string is going to sound good on an
Sure,
octave
sure,
mandolin,
sure.
right?
Hotel California, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, and all of that stuff. So there's a really huge repertoire to explore there, and I've started doing that. And I think I've got some interest. I need to do more things like this to try to promote it, to get it out there.
Right.
And I need to do more with my own personal YouTube to figure out like how much free content should I generate to try to direct people to the Patreon to hopefully pay for that,
Right.
because it does take a lot of work to learn these songs, first of all, to transcribe them. And I'm literally writing them out in notation and tablature. And that is what you pay for, is getting the notation and tablature for these things, as well as instructional videos. So I'll play the whole song along with the recording so that you can hear how it fits. And then I do another instructional video where I'll slow it down and take each part piece by piece and show you how to play it.
Yeah, good. And for everybody listening, make sure you to check out the show notes. We'll have links to all this stuff that you can go check out. And before we sign off, Ben, I'll give you a chance to just drop all those URLs and stuff So when you're transcribing something, there are decisions you've got to make all the way along about what parts to keep and what parts to drop, right? I'm reminded of, we do superstition, guitar, bass, drums, and somewhere along the way, I started playing the horn part that happens halfway through the verse,
Yeah,
right, on guitar. I started copying that
right.
on guitar, and my bassist started doubling me. And it's such a good little moment, right? It's just really
Yeah, that's really
nice.
hot.
I had somebody come up to me at the end of a gig and be like, "I couldn't believe I was hearing the horns happening on guitar." I was like, "Yeah, that was a decision we made, right? We leaned into that particular thing." But there are a lot of voicings and phrases and stuff in that we didn't bring forward into our instrumentation. So, what informs the decisions you make about that?
That's a great question. I have over the years developed a very strong sense of what I need in terms of a lead sheet,
Okay.
right? If I want to try to fit this song on one piece of paper, okay. When I was giving you my history, I skipped an important section, which was after I did the theater at Lime Kiln, but before I joined Still Surfing, I had a gig at a sandwich shop, a solo gig
All
at a
right.
Potbelly sandwich shop,
Nice.
right? And I did that for a long time, like 2.5 years. And I used to go there with a 3-ring binder. And over time, I just filled it with songs. And at first, I would literally go to the store and I would buy a book of songs and I would just cut the pages out and stick them in.
Yep.
But at a certain point, I was like, I didn't want to turn pages anymore, right? So from that time on, for the past 20 years, I've been trying to refine my approach to like what makes a lead sheet. When you're a musician, what information do you need to know? You need to know the shape of the chorus and the shape of the verse and the shape of the bridge. You need to have access to the lyrics that you can read quickly in case you forget them, or at least the first line of the first phrase of a couple of lines. You don't necessarily need the whole verse there. You just need a hint of what it is so that it'll jog your memory. And
Right.
hopefully you've rehearsed enough that that's enough to get you through the whole song. And usually it is for me in my experience. Um, but it's like, what can you take out of the song to fit it on 1 or 2 pages? Because if you just use the transcription we were talking about Ultimate Guitar Tab earlier. If you use the transcription from that, you've got to have that thing scrolling and scrolling and scrolling because they have every line of every verse. And a lot of it is repetitive,
Yep.
right? So I make good use of the repeat symbol. I make good use of just chord notation, like it's this chord, this chord, this chord, this chord. Line 1 is these 4 chords, line 2 is these 3 chords, line 4 is this. And I've just got a little chart.
That's part of the wisdom of this, is how do you convey that in a way that's complete but also super efficient.
Yeah, yeah. And the notes that make sense to me are not necessarily going to make sense to you or any other person.
Sure.
But for the sake of this octave mandolin project, I really do try to capture enough of every song that you can get through the whole. I always include a full verse and a full chorus, and then at least little sections first. So, for example, in Sweet Child of Mine, there are 3 or 4 little sections that are these repetitive jams, and you're just like jamming the chords under the guitar solo. I didn't chart out the whole slash guitar solo or
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
But I charted out the important hook for those parts, and then I just have repeat these 4 chords for this part of the jam, repeat these 4 chords for the next part of the jam. And if you know enough to get through that much of the transcription, you should know enough to be able to create a complete performance of the song.
Sure. Sure. It's a good example
Yeah.
of a tune that we do with my fiddle player playing Slash's part all the way through. She plays from the intro all the
Nice.
way through all the solos, note for note, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, re-instrumenting things is a really effective way of making them your own. In our case, necessity. I'm not going to sit down and learn all that. If I was going to I would have done it in the 90s, and I didn't. So I'm glad that
Right.
my fiddle player brought that one up, and she knew it from having played it with another band before. So that works out.
Yeah.
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 Very cool.
And I guess the other piece of this, and again, I mean, I feel like we're talking way more about me and my projects than I had really intended. I really wanted to talk more about the process, but the last thing I think is also part of this, which is that I've been teaching guitar lessons for 20 years.
Mm.
And my approach to teaching a guitar lesson is I ask the kid what they want to learn,
Right.
or the adult for that matter, but mostly kids. And I learn that thing faster than them and I teach it to them,
Right.
whatever it is.
Right.
So whatever they're learning, I learn it faster and then I just teach it to them. And that's how I do guitar lessons. It's a little bit cheap, but over the years, I've learned a whole lot of music that way. And then I guess my reason for, again, turning to the octave mandolin is I sort of got bored learning things that kids wanted to play, and I wanted to apply the same technique and use some of the time that I had to do that instead.
I do want to turn to the philosophy of it and
Yeah,
the thinking behind what makes the cut for transcription and what doesn't.
yeah. Okay, so I've mentioned that I'm a guitar teacher, and I mentioned that I have kids, and I've also had a few adult teachers. I want to introduce this book because when I have, excuse me, adult students, when I have an adult student, I'll frequently refer to them to a book of some kind. And one of my favorites is this one. It's called The Listening Book by W.A. Mathieu. I don't know if he says Matthew or Matthew. He's got 3 books about music, and they range from this, which is philosophical, to his biggest one is called The Harmonic Experience, and it's literally a textbook for a college course in physics, the physics of music. So
Wow.
he's a really smart guy, and it's very fascinating stuff. But this one I recommend to anyone. And I want to read an excerpt from this, and it gets a little deep and philosophical. I'm just going to read about 3 paragraphs from something called Finding Your Own Music. Okay. So here, actually, let me throw on my glasses. I'm an old man.
No, me
Dan.
too. Yeah, no, 100%.
Okay. Some people have fear about improvising their own music. They have invested so much time and care in playing music that it has been composed by someone else, usually a dead someone else like Bach or Ravel, that there doesn't seem to be any other way of leaving the printed page. On the other end of the spectrum are the folks who avoid playing anything that sounds like anyone else. They need to feel original to reaffirm each note in their personal freedom. There's a dread of being cliche, hackneyed, trapped by the culture. It's all been done before. Actually, all music is village music. We are collective beasts, more collective than individual. Our music reflects this. Even artists who seem to jut out angularly from their culture, like Beethoven or Cecil Taylor, are speaking for their village through their village, though their village may be hard to find. Maybe theirs is a village of some particular mindset, a prevalent psychology, an ephemeral community of feeling. Even if their village seems crazy to us or irresponsible or suicidal, it nevertheless exists just beyond the trees. And skipping ahead a little bit, the very idea of finding your own music is in some ways counter to culture. Yet there are millions of us looking for our own music, and that's our village, the people who are looking for our music, right? The last sentence I want to read. The truth is, the line between what is uniquely yours and what is given to you by your culture is invisible to you. Don't worry about it.
Hmm.
So this is something that I've carried with me for a long time. It goes pretty deep, but the idea behind it is human beings to me are pattern recognizers, right? We find comfort in the familiar, but there's something like poetry where any poet, any lyricist, any songwriter is creating a pattern and then breaking that in some way that gives interest to us that we want to keep coming back to because it creates this tension, this attraction, this magnetism that we really find exciting as human beings. So I think thinking of your cover band as something that's going to emerge from the fabric of our human experience, the fabric of pop music, the fabric of whatever subgenre of music you listen to, whether it's rap or brass and drum music or the thing that probably most of our audience listen to, which we can call pop and classic rock or whatever, right? We're drawing from the same traditions, and then we're finding interesting ways to make something stand out within that in a way that is exciting. And whether we're trying to make it resonate closely to the original or resonate uniquely in a way that only we feel like we can resonate, that may just be a feeling, but it doesn't make it an illegitimate pursuit. My original cover of, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen, I'm on Fire may feel totally unique to me. You might do one that's very, very similar, and I may never hear yours. And we both have this feeling that ours is so unique but it could be really similar too, even though it doesn't sound like the original, do you know? And that's something that happened to me. My band, the Courtney Janes, we recorded that on our second CD, I think, and only to come to find out that another bluegrass band did a very similar version, probably better at a technically higher level than what we did. And it became kind of a bit of a hit. And we're like, oh, now it sounds like we copied that, but we didn't even know it existed. But it
Yeah.
was like two people had an idea to take a bluegrass spin on the same song at roughly the same time and released it individually. It's kind of interesting how that happens, but I don't know. I kind of wanted to get your reflection on that because it's maybe the first time you're hearing at least the words from that book.
Yeah, it is. The thing that struck me was the last sentence. Would you read that last sentence again?
Yeah, shoot, I just lost the page,
Oh,
but
it's all right. I can paraphrase
I know it's
what I
right here.
think I thought I heard anyway.
It says, the truth is the line between what is uniquely yours and what is given to you by your culture is invisible to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, that resonates with me. I think there are ways that we are precious about our interpretation without doing respect to the fact that interpretation is fundamentally housed in a cultural condition.
Yeah.
And that, how many possible ways are there to do a bluegrass I'm on fire? Right?
Right.
It a finite number probably. I mean, I don't know. Maybe somebody's going to find a way to do it that's really out of the box, but take a song, make it bluegrass, there's probably some common places you're going to land. I think that with the New Strange, the approach we take tends to fall into the category called rock it up. By the time we get to the third verse of Message in a Bottle, I'm not playing the riff anymore. I'm doing great big bar chords and like it's intense. By the time we get to the end of it, we're banging it hard. And that song was already a banger
Right.
as originally recorded, but we amp it way up and get good response from that. I'm sure we're not the only people doing that. And I heard some echoes of that in a live version of it that I heard the Police doing pretty recently. I heard them doing something that was like, oh yeah, okay, so I got some antecedent here to the choices I'm making here, even from the group that originated the song. And in a market, I've seen songs that are obscure suddenly become really common to cover, really popular to cover because somebody did it and other people were in the audience and thought, oh, that's cool, and they're doing it.
Or something goes viral too. Like one of the things that I love is Lizzie McAlpine.
Mm-mm.
Do you know who she is? Okay, she's a really cool songwriter, and she does a cover of "Teenage Dirtbag" by Wheatus,
Okay.
right? Which is just, it's jazzy and acoustic, and it's not bringing it up; it's bringing it way down.
Right.
But she makes it so beautiful; it's almost heartbreaking. And there's maybe also because she's a girl singing about a girl, there may be some other tension there that we find provocative. I don't know, but it's cool no matter what it's about. And it actually made me rediscover Wheatus's recording. What's that guy's name from Wheatus?
I'm not going to have it.
Brendan Brown.
All
Brendan.
right.
No, I
Yeah.
wrote it in my
Okay,
notes.
good. Yeah, no, I'm not going to have that. Yeah.
But yeah, the Lizzie McAlpine's thing went super viral for a minute, and then all of a sudden, I noticed a bunch of cover bands were doing "Teenage Dirtbag," and they might not have been doing the Lizzie McAlpine version; they were doing somebody's version.
Sure.
It was in the public. What's the word? Milieu.
Zeitgeist.
Weltanschauung.
Yeah.
Zeitgeist. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
People were thinking about it, and so all the cover bands did it for a few minutes. You know, and
we're doing Beggin, the Maniskin version of Beggin, because it was hot on TikTok for a minute 2 years ago. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So those things are in the cultural stew, and we're in the stew whether we like it or not. And we pick these things up, and they become quote unquote ours, even though we were the antenna tuned to that channel for a moment. But if it hadn't been us, it might have been some other antenna.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just with music. Like this is sort of maybe a big tangent, but on Thursday for Thanksgiving, I was driving along the highway after picking up some catered food, and I was just wondering, like all of a sudden on this particular highway I was on, there was way more traffic in the middle of a Thursday than usually there is at that time, and I just asked myself, how many of these cars have a turkey in the trunk? And I just got this weird image of human beings as like little ants all doing the same thing at the same time. And cover bands are probably the same way, right? The
For
Turkey in
sure.
the Trunk, or we're all doing the same cover of Begging for a minute. It's really kind of cool. And I think, I agree with everything from a business and practicality standpoint, using the technology that exists, that cover bands are going to be the most successful if you're be able to create renditions of music that are accurate to the original recordings, right? But if we put that aside for a second, it's not horrible to give yourself permission to go out on a limb and make your own arrangement of something, or tweak it a little bit to make it your own, to put your little stamp on it, and just to show off the thing that resonates within you uniquely. I think that's a valid artistic choice, and it can be a lucrative business choice if you do it selectively.
Well, I think if you do it deliberately, it falls
Yeah.
right into the drum that I've been beating on this podcast since episode 1, which is almost anything that you would choose to do is a valid branding choice, as long as it is a choice, and as long as it's not, I do this because it's what bands have to do, or,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I think choosing to be the band that takes classic rock and puts it on octave mandolin in front of bass, drums, and keys or something, like, wild, wild, crazy, but I love it. Like, if that's the choice you're going to make and have that be the differentiator that you're going to bring to the market, super cool. Totally do it, right? If you're going to be the band that takes 80s pop tunes and turns all those synth lines into guitar lines, I don't know, great. Like, if that's the choice you're making and that's the brand you're going to stand up and the story you're going to tell the market about what you're going to deliver, super cool. No problem with that. I think there's absolutely every chance you could be super successful with that kind of thing. It's interesting because it's a contrast against the section you just read. The more we can break away from here's how cover bands do it and bring our own thinking to that and our own interpretation to that, even if that interpretation is, no, I want to do it note for note, I want to do it just like the recording, that's still a choice.
Yeah.
And I would hate for anyone to be left like the official position of the podcast is that that's a better choice than some other thing. I think any choice you make is valid as long as you're choosing that. And again, in my whole career, it's been that we wanted to do some big horn tune and we had no horns. So we put those critical lines somewhere. And I had a bassist 2 bassists ago. The bassist revolving door has continued to revolve for me. But 2 bassists ago, I had a jazz student from UNCG was my bassist, and she could put almost any part of a song into her bass work, and it was great. It was so cool. She could pull out just weird little lines that were in there that I hadn't heard in the song, but she picked up on it and she brought it into the bass line, and it just fleshed out what we were doing in ways that were really cool. So I think a lot of creativity is available there that frankly a lot of bands don't take advantage of.
Yeah. Yeah. You and Adam often talk about, I also work in technology during my day job.
Yeah.
And you often talk about who is your target user, who's your target audience, right? And you don't have to have the same target audience for everything.
That's
right. As I said, one filter that I listened to through is my most successful band ended up making most of our money playing weddings in Napa and Sonoma County, California. And what we realized was they don't want us to be playing bangers and stealing attention. They want us to provide a texture that is enjoyable and pleasant in the background. And we can be very good at that and enjoy that. And in those cases, like making the choice to do a deep cut from a band, or making a choice, you've got the one wallflower after the show who comes up and tips you $50, and they're like, oh man, that was a great cover of Teenage Dirtbag. I didn't expect to hear it at a wedding, or whatever it would be. You know what I mean? So the idea of knowing your audience can change whether you're playing a frat party or whether you're playing,
for sure.
It's totally fine to be a band that is in the background, and you can still generate fans and book other gigs. And you can be in a band that can be both. You can be in a band that can turn around and do really big bangers all night long, and also pull it way back and have these softer acoustic renditions of something. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
I would say that's a mark of maturity for a band. There was a band that my company hired for a Christmas party one year, and they were great, really impressed with them. But the first year we had them, they were all banger. And so they played through the dinner time bangers, and it was tough. Like we couldn't talk. Like it was. Then the dance party started, and they were perfect for that. But they were doing dance party music the whole show, which was not really appropriate. The second year we had them back again, and the dinner set was like very pulled back and jazzy, and but still interesting covers. They did Creep, like in a pulled back jazzy way in the dinner set.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and it was really clear in that year they had gotten feedback and taken the feedback and grown their show and evolved what they could do, and it was markedly better the second year we had them. So that's really the thing, is to understand the moving pieces of the events you're at and what the interest is that your audience has in focusing on you and in not focusing on you, um, and designing a program to fit,
Yeah.
including a
Yeah.
jazzy creep if that's what you're going to do, right?
Great song, by the way.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's one of my
So,
solo acoustic vocal show off tunes. That big Tom York
sure.
scream in the middle is
Yeah.
one of my
Yeah.
signatures.
That's amazing.
I think the takeaway that we want to leave everyone with is that the decisions that you make about your branding and about your truth to the original versus truth to your interpretation, that is something that you need to decide. It's a branding decision that, in my view, ought to happen before you decide on a name, for instance.
Right.
Um, and then there's a lot of work to do to decide how you're going to land a recording on your instrumentation, how you're going to pick what parts of a song need to be in it to capture the ethos of the song, and what parts you can trust that their memory will fill in. And I really appreciate you bringing up the philosophy of where our interpretation lives inside the cultural language and conversation of music. I think that's really fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to say a word of encouragement to other bands that are out there, like some of my less successful projects that are a little bit on sabbatical. It's okay to explore, to find, to try different things until you find that chemistry that works uniquely for your band. And it may not be making the obvious choice. Sometimes by making a counterintuitive choice or one or two, it may lead you to open doors that you weren't expecting to open, and you may find something that suddenly the floodgates open, and now you've got all this momentum to go out and get yourself to the next level. So
Yeah.
if you find yourself struggling and not sure what to do, or you feel like, oh, my music doesn't sound like the original, that's okay. Maybe you're just at a point in the path where you're finding your own way to build a product, a musical product that will resonate both for yourself and for your audience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other it's okay thing to say is that limitation is a driver of creativity. So if
100%.
I am not a particularly I'm a really really good rhythm player, and I'm a kind of adequate lead player. So when I'm up against a lead that's really technical and I just know like I'm not going to get there, or I could, but I'm not going to invest in the effort to do it.
Sure.
Um, that's a moment for me to get creative and to start working on how I'm going to express what that lead expresses, understand the shape of it and the direction of it and the build of it, and have that happen without those particular notes.
And there are so many times, if you're, especially if you're singing lead, when you may be able to play the guitar part alone, but if the original recording, the lead is being played by a guitarist and the singer is a different person,
Right,
you can't be both of those people at the same time,
right, right.
So it's totally valid to simplify the guitar part in order to sell the song through the vocals, because
100%.
that's ultimately the most important part. So
100%. All right. Ben Hulan, great time talking to you. Give us all of your, we'll have this in the show notes too, but just lay us out all of where people can reach you and get to your projects and get to all your stuff.
sure. Well, okay. So I've got patreon.com/exploring octave mandolin. That's probably the best place to find me. I do have a website for the Yacht Dogs, which is my yacht rock band, which is sort of being reimagined, but you can email me at benji@theyachtdogs.com. And I have a YouTube channel, YouTube/Ben Hulan, BenHulan. Those are probably the best places to find me. Also, Soundboard6 on Instagram.
Awesome. We'll drop all that in the show notes too. Go hunt up Ben. Continue this conversation. I think, you know, a next conversation to have might be a little more nuts and bolts. Like, what do I need to do to take a song from how I hear it on the recording, how I see it on Ultimate Guitar, and how I deliver it on stage. I think a nuts and bolts conversation might be a good follow up to this. So Adam and I'll chat about that. We'll be in touch or whatever.
Yeah, I would anytime. It's funny. I wrote out a whole bunch of notes to have that conversation, but then we focused on other stuff. But
Listen,
it's all cool.
yeah, I think a more philosophical sort of where to stand as you think through these things. You got to start there. So
Yeah,
we'll talk about whether that'd be a good thing we want to do. I think it probably would. So
awesome.
all
And
right.
for those who are listening, another great way to reach me is to join the Patreon because I'm in there every day.
There
So
you
you could just
go.
message me directly.
There you go. Coverband
Less
Confidential.
than a cup of coffee.
That's right. That's right. For all of your nerdy music chat, gear talk. We didn't even get into gear. I have some gear news, but we'll deal with it next week. It's all fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right on.
Yep. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Coverband Confidential podcast for December 6th, 2024. Everybody stay cool.